This is my introduction. Welcome to the presentation. I have 29 years of experience in IMIT. My name is Mark Bernard. Most of my training came at IBM Big Blue, where I also worked for 2 years on the red team, attacking offshore assets. I've also taught in college as a professor of applied science in systems engineering. I have over 800,000 shares in 147 countries, and I have multiple certifications. My experience spans 12 of 16 critical infrastructures, including the majority of that in the financial services area, as well as government, manufacturing of food, technology, clothing, logistics, and distribution, as well as telecom, nanotech, also pharmaceutical, legal services, and in the healthcare sector. In 2017, I created this mind map. Covers a number of different areas that I think are critical to any enterprise security program, including risk management, enterprise security architecture, monitoring communications, program management, knowledge management, governance, and integration. It's available at my website. The link is below if you're interested in downloading it as a PDF. In this short video, we're going to talk about Special Publication 171, Revision 1, and some of the gaps that I found in it. You might recognize this illustration. I posted it on LinkedIn and social media and got some interesting responses from it. NIST is in the process of updating this framework standard for the protection of controlled unclassified information in non-federal systems and organizations. And when I reviewed it recently, I found a number of gaps in it. In this short video, I'm going to review 171 and identify a number of the gaps and the complexities and why it doesn't actually fit in the commercial sector like the ISO standards do. NIST standards are created because they're given the authority to, under the FISMA Act. NIST also has its own act. They create a multitude of standards to help classify information and protect it, as well as information systems and technology. It also relates back to the FIPS standards, and most recently they've been identifying the linkage to ISO 27001, and I believe it's because the federal standards actually don't work in the commercial sector. To begin with, the way that the framework standards are created, the difference between ISO and NIST is that they don't actually have, NIST doesn't actually have a management system that links the standards. Unlike in the ISO world, where the management system sits at the top of the pyramid and standards are mapped into it. Normally within the governance of technology, at the very top, we have a strategy that maps to the business plan. And below that, we write policies, which are communication tools to tell employees and contractors what they need to do. And then below that, we write practices or standard operating procedures that provide instructions on what needs to be done. And those are mapped to standards. The standards like we're reviewing today for ISO and NIST, for example. Those standards help us to mitigate risk, which are mitigated through controls that have been implemented and described in these standards. Immediately within the opening pages of 171R1, you can see the linkages to ISO 27001. In section 1.3, organization of the special publication, you can see that supporting appendices draw the linkages between NIST and the International Standards Organization. In section 2.2, development of security requirements, you can see the linkages being drawn here as well, not just between NIST and its frameworks, but also between the federal standards, FIPS. In Chapter 3, the requirements, you can see again here that the ISO security controls and standards framework is being referenced within the NIST and obviously endorsed. Also within the appendices, you can see the list of standards that are related, and near the bottom of that list is references to ISO 27001 and 27002. In Appendix D, there are a number of mapping tables that also reference ISO 27001. In one of the mapping tables in Appendix D, you can see where the reference is drawn between the 171 standard, NIST, and ISO. And you can see under the ISO column a number of gaps saying there's no mapping requirements actually listed, which is not true, which I'm going to show you in a moment. In Appendix F of the 171, you can see a little more of an explanation of what that control is supposed to do. If you flip over to Special Publication 800-53-4 in Appendix H, you can see the linkages again being drawn with the ISO 27001 framework. However, under AC-17, there are a number of controls listed which weren't evident in the 171 document. Here's that table again from 171. You can see no direct mapping. Well, we're going to show you differently. And the NIST 800-53-4, you can see here under AC-17 that there are several ISO controls listed which weren't referenced in 171. We're going to walk through what these controls are so that you get a better understanding of what the 853-4 is suggesting. The first control that's identified is under A.6.2, mobile devices and teleworking. And there's an objective to ensure the security of teleworking and use of mobile devices. This is important. That adds the context. Now 621 mobile device policy is the first standard to review. A policy supporting security measures shall be adopted to manage the risk introduced by mobile devices. The next standard, A.6.2.2 teleworking, a policy and supporting security measures shall be implemented to protect information accessed, processed, and stored at teleworking sites. Now, if you recall back in document 171, it talked about 3 specific control points: the use of cryptography to protect the confidentiality of remote access sessions, also root remote access via managed access control points, and also authorize remote execution of privileged commands and remote access to security. And in document 800-53-4, it specifically talks about remote access. So the first ISO control point touched on mobile device policy and teleworking. The policy provides the instruction. Teleworking discusses about the conditions. The next control is under communication security and specifically network security management. 13.1.1 network controls. Networks shall be managed and controlled to protect information and system applications. This is a good control objective to have because you want to make sure that your infrastructure is properly secured so that remote access can happen in a secure way that protects information and your assets. Now the next control that NIST recommends from the ISO 27001 is under Communication Security 13.2, Information Transfer. The objective here is to maintain the security of information transferred within an organization and with any external entity. I thought this was a little unusual, so I put a question mark next to it, because usually when we talk about transferring information to external entities, it's with third parties, such as service providers that are downstream or upstream from the organization, not necessarily to one of our employees who are using a mobile device or working from home. The next control that 800-53-4 recommends from the ISO 27001 is under A.14, System Acquisition, Development, and Maintenance, and more specifically under A.14.1, Security Requirements for Information Systems. The objective reads, to ensure that information security is an integral part of information systems across the entire life cycle, period. This also includes the requirements for information systems which provide services over public networks. This control set is specifically targeting the development of systems, so the SDLC cycle, and how security is embedded into the whole systems development cycle, ensuring that applications can't be hacked. Each domain within ISO 27001 has a specific objective. This objective is designed to help focus the mind on the specific control sets and add context, which is much needed during risk management. The specific control is A.14.1.2, securing application services on public networks, and the control is described as information involved in an application services passing over public networks shall be protected from fraudulent activity, contract, dispute, and unauthorized disclosure or modification. Now I'd like to add a few additional controls because NIST 800-53-4 or 171-1 did not recognize the fact apparently that you need to have cryptographic controls, you need to have a standard in place. Now I know that they do have them and they have them defined, but I'm kind of surprised that they didn't actually identify the ISO control that would help support that within the commercial sector. This control comes from ISO 27002, which is like the standards framework for the management system, which is described in ISO 27001. And this one talks about specifically cryptographic controls. The objective is to ensure proper and effective use of cryptographic protection to protect the confidentiality, authentication, and integrity of information. In Control 10.1.1 policy on the use of cryptographic controls, it reads as follows. A policy on the use of cryptographic controls for the protection of information should be developed and implemented. Now some people might say, well, why is a policy important? And I can tell you that it's important because if you don't protect your information, there are people in the organization that will encrypt it using their own keys. And if that person leaves the organization for whatever reason, they may take their keys with them and you'll have lost all the data that they have encrypted. Another control that I would suggest needs to fit into here is A.9 under 27001, access control, and specifically the business requirements for access control need to be defined. Another policy that should be added is A.9 access control, and under A.9.1 business requirements for access control, the objective is to limit access to information and information processing facilities. The first control objective under access control is the access control policy. An access control policy shall be established, documented, and reviewed based on business and information requirements. Business requirements are what drives the needs for infrastructure and for information protection and systems protection. So this is a really important policy statement to make. It helps define what those controls will be and how rigorous they need to be. The next control is A.9.1.2, access to networks and network services. And the control reads as follows. Users shall only be provided with the access to the network and the network services that they have been specifically authorized to use, which is driven by the first policy, the business requirements. The business decides how much access a person needs to do their job. One other control that should be added to this standard is A.9.2, user access management, and the control reads as follows. To ensure authorized user access and to prevent unauthorized access to systems and services. The control point that I've identified that would be useful is A.9.2.3, management of privileged access rights. The control reads as follows. The allocation and use of privileged access rights shall be restricted and we're going to talk about privileged users a little bit later on in this presentation, and some of those would be database administrators, system administrators, people that can change the security of a system. Now we're going to move on to the next control, 3.1.17, protect wireless access using authentication and encryption. That's in the document 171-R1. This is the fourth control out of 5 that I picked on within the 171 document. It's mapped to NIST 853-4 control AC-18, wireless access authentication and encryption. You can see under the ISO 27001 column that it says no direct mapping. This is not true, and I'm going to show you why. The verbal explanation in 171 Appendix F is organizations can authenticate individuals and devices to help protect wireless access to the system. Special attention should be given to the wide variety of devices that are part of the Internet of Things and potential wireless access to the organizational systems. It certainly appears that the group who are responsible for developing and maintaining 853R4 and 171R1 really should get together and have a coffee and chat, because you can see here clearly that AC18 wireless access is mapped to a number of ISO standards, which it claimed that there weren't any in 171 appendix. Those controls include some familiar ones you've seen already: 6.2.1, 13.11, and 13.21. The first control is A.6.2, mobile devices and teleworking, and the objective is to ensure the security of teleworking and use of mobile devices. I thought it was kind of interesting that the control is about the use of mobile devices when the risk that was identified seemed to be associated with wireless access. Here's the control again, just to refresh your memory: 3.1.17, protect wireless access using authentication and encryption. Nothing about mobile devices here. The specific control, A.6.2.1, mobile device policy. A policy and supporting security measures shall be adopted to manage the risk introduced by using mobile devices. The next ISO 27001 control, referenced by NIST 800-53-4, is under A13, communication security, and under A.13.1, network security management. The objective reads, to ensure the protection of information in networks and its supporting information processing facilities. The specific control, A.13.1.1, network controls, reads as follows: networks shall be managed and controlled to protect information systems and applications. This makes a lot of sense when it comes to wireless access or any access points into your network. The next control, referenced by NIST 800-53-4, is again under communication security, and it's A.13.2, information transfer, and the objective reads as follows: to maintain the security of information transferred within an organization and with any external entity. The control, A.13.2.1, information transfer policies and procedures. The objective reads as follows: formal transfer policies, procedures, and controls shall be in place to protect the transfer of information through the use of all types of communication facilities. I thought this control was a little out of place myself, and that's why I put a question mark next to it, because usually when we talk about external entities, we talk about third parties, service providers, or manufacturers who are sharing information with us. So it's kind of weird. I also recommend additional controls, including A.9.2, user access management, to ensure authorized user access and to prevent unauthorized access to systems and services. The control, A.9.2.3, management of privileged access rights, reads as follows: the allocation and use of privileged access rights shall be restricted and controlled. And I think this is specifically important to wireless devices and access to the network. In addition to 9.2, I also suggest 9.4, system and application access control. The objective is to prevent unauthorized access to systems and applications, and the control reads as follows: use of privileged utility programs, and the control objective is the use of utility programs that might be capable of overriding system and application controls shall be restricted and tightly controlled. 9.2 user access and 9.4 system application access are vulnerability points that could be exploited through defects within software or software development tools. These should be added to the list under NIST. A third control that should be implemented is 10, cryptography, and 10.1, cryptographic controls. The objective is to ensure the proper and effective use of cryptography to protect the confidentiality, authentication, and integrity of information. This is important, especially with wireless access being so vulnerable. As I mentioned earlier in this video, policies are important to help guide practices and implement standards. The policy on the use of cryptographic controls not only helps to guide the infrastructure team and the IMIT team or ICT teams in the implementation of security protection, but also it helps to prevent the introduction of cryptography that may not be controlled or guided by management, which could lead to the loss of information should a disgruntled employee walk out with the private keys. The last control, 505, that I had picked on was 3.1.19. Encrypt CUI on mobile devices and mobile computing platforms. And the reference to the NIST standard is AC-19. And under ISO, it says that there are no direct mappings. So we're going to correct that. The verbal description reads as follows. Organizations can use full device encryption or container-based encryption to protect the confidentiality of CUI on mobile devices and on computing platforms. Container-based encryption provides a more fine-grained approach to the encryption of data and the information, including, for example, encryption selected data structures such as files, records, and fields. Now, I honestly think that the people who are updating 171 should really take the people who maintain 53-4 out for dinner and pick their brains a little bit, because clearly there is a huge disconnect here. Again, under the NIST Special Publication 800-53-4 in Appendix H, you can clearly see that they believe that there are ISO 27001 controls that fit, including 6.2.1 and 11.2.6 and 13.2.1. Now it appears that they really like a certain set of controls for mobile devices because we're seeing the same ones over and over now. So A.6.2 mobile devices and teleworking. The objective is to ensure the security of teleworking and the use of mobile devices. Sound familiar? The control is A.6.2.1 mobile device policy. A policy and supporting security measures shall be adopted to manage the risk introduced by mobile devices. Now in this case, it actually is, the risk is actually associated with mobile devices, unlike in the other cases. Now the next control that NIST 53-4 recommends is under A11, physical and environmental security, and the objective under A.11.2 for equipment to prevent loss, damage, theft, or compromise of assets and interruption to the organization's operations. The specific control they're talking about is A.11.2.6, security of equipment and assets off premises, and the control reads as follows. Security shall be applied to off-site assets, taking into account the different risks of working outside the organization's premises. I put a question mark next to this one because I'm not sure what the loss of a mobile device, a singular mobile device, would have on an organization. The next control that NIST 800-53-4 recommends under this area is under A.13 and A.13.2, the transfer of information. And the objective reads, to maintain the security of information transferred within an organization and with any external entity. Now the control talks about external entity, but the risk seems to be associated with mobile devices. Disconnect. The control goes on to read A.13.2.1, information transfer policies and procedures, and the objective reads as follows. Formal transfer policies, procedures, and controls shall be in place to protect the transfer of information through the use of all types of communication facilities. This definitely doesn't seem to apply to someone with a mobile device, so I'm not sure that it fits here. Of course, I recommend that mobile devices should be encrypted and that the policy guiding the use of cryptography within the organization should be defined for these mobile devices to prevent both the negative but also promote the positive use of cryptography. So that concludes my review of those 5 control points. There are many, many others, but I'd like to move on and talk about classification and labeling for a few moments because that's really important within ISO and within NIST. It appears as though NIST has decided on a 3 scales classification schema classified as low, moderate, or high vulnerability. And if you read FIPS 200 and 199, they help to describe a little bit more about how 800-53-4 is applied. The classification schema helps to identify what security controls need to be applied based on the risk. And in ISO, it's no different. ISO also has a similar approach. Under the ISO 27002 control point 8.2.2, it provides some fairly detailed description of how labeling is applied. The control objective is an appropriate set of procedures for the information labeling should be developed and implemented in accordance with the information classification schema adopted by the organization. Here's how labeling should work. At the highest level, you have a classification label that gets applied. At the next level down, you have logical views. These act as filters over the entire database, only providing access based on the label to specific data elements within the records. Normally, the business users have access up to the logical views, and then below the logical views, we have privileged users who are providing development services, security services, admin, and database services to the organization. Below the red line, where the privileged users access the database, they have full view of all the data in order to do the maintenance that's required. In some cases, the data is actually encrypted and they don't see anything. They just know that it's a field with something in it. Below the maintenance views are the actual databases, whether it's on a local server or a cluster of servers, or whether it's sitting in the cloud somewhere, spanned across multiple regions on the planet. That was the application view. Now let's look at the security view. So a user goes to log on to a screen in an application, and they get some type of a private authority, perhaps, that allows them to get access. Private authorities are usually a no-no, so we try to avoid that, and we assign authority to the objects that the user creates in a different way. So follow along. Group profiles are the answer. So within the user account, whenever it creates an object, it should get assigned to the group authority and not the individual, so that they don't have private authorities. Now, groups can be broken up by departments, such as accounting, purchasing, and marketing. They can also be used to help delegate authorities for privileged users. Speaking of privileged users, they are the people who have special authorities, such as system administrators and database administrators, and usually their authorities are restricted so that only they can see the controls and the screens that they need to have access to, whereas the front office people who we described before would only be able to see the things that they actually have access to through those logical views. At the lowest level within the infrastructure and the technology stack, we have direct utility programs that provide direct access to the databases, bypassing all application security controls. These types of controls, along with the privileged users and special authorities, need to be audited and reviewed on a regular basis because they have such control over the infrastructure that they can make changes, and then they can also cover them up if they were malicious. But most people are not malicious, thank God. How can secure knowledge management help you with your cybersecurity program? Well, with all my experience, I had a vision for a company, and that's why I started Secure Knowledge Management Incorporated. Not just any kind of company, but a security company that would help the middle to small size businesses. Now, in this vision, I see 4 buckets of services that we can possibly provide to small business. First of all, we can help the individuals get certified. We can also help businesses get certified. And then secondly, there are people who want to do it themselves. So we can provide all the materials, such as some of the ones that we discussed in this presentation. Also, there are some people who are just seeking expertise and they want someone who's been there and done that and has a t-shirt. So we're definitely the people. And then finally, there are some people who can't do it themselves. They need to outsource the CISO role or the security manager role, or they need to outsource the internal audit or the monitoring role for the security operations center. And we can help with all of those things. Just visit us on our website and drop us a line if you have a question. I want to thank the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange operation for inviting me in to have this discussion with its members and allowing me to share this video with you over the internet. Thank you very much. My contact information is listed here if you'd like to contact me directly if you have any questions.